Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Nehami and these are the headlines. In Pakistan, security forces have killed 3 terrorists during an operation in northwestern Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. The military's media wing said an army officer and a soldier were martyred in an exchange of fire with the terrorists. At least 7 people have been killed and 5 others injured in a bomb blast in Afghanistan's capital, Kabul. This comes as the US said it held productive discussions with Turkey regarding the security of Kabul airport. However, the Taliban warned that Turkey will be responsible for the consequences if it chooses to stay in Afghanistan. Meanwhile, in a meeting with his Afghan counterpart, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi reaffirmed Islamabad's support to the peace process. In South Africa, the death toll in protests following the jailing of former President Jacob Zuma has risen to 45. Officials say at least 22 more people have been killed in the KwaZulu-Natal province. The police minister says the government is trying to contain the violence but stopped short of declaring an emergency. In a briefing, Becky Saleh, 757 people have been arrested so far. Kashmiris around the world are observing the 90th Martyrs' Day today. On this day in 1931, 22 Muslims were martyred during a peaceful protest against Dogra rule in Srinagar. In a tweet, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan said Islamabad supports the right to self-determination of the Kashmiris. He said their struggle against illegal Indian occupation is steeped in a history of resistance and sacrifice. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has called on the international community to revamp vaccine production and ensure its equal distribution. Virtually addressing UN Forum on Sustainable Development, Khan said the developing nations must be given vaccines at a fair price. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 4 million lives and has infected over 187 million people. Those were the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. In Pakistan, security forces have killed 3 terrorists during an operation in northwestern Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. The military's media wing said an army officer and a soldier were martyred in an exchange of fire with the terrorists. The ISPR said the operation was conducted after security forces had received reports of terrorists' presence in Zewa area of the Kurum district. It said that a cordon and search operation is underway to eliminate any other terrorists present in the area. At least 7 people have been killed and 5 others injured in a bomb blast in Afghanistan's capital, Kabul. This comes as the US said it held productive discussions with Turkey regarding the security of Kabul airport. In a briefing, Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby said Washington is grateful for UNRWA's willingness to lead this effort. However, the Taliban say Turkey will be responsible for the consequences if it chooses to stay in Afghanistan. They have also claimed to capture 4 more districts in Daikundi, Laghman and Bamiyan provinces. Meanwhile, the Afghan Defense Ministry says security forces have killed over 260 fighters in 13 provinces in the past 24 hours. And for more on this, we are joined by Ali Sarwar Naqvi, former ambassador from Islamabad. Mr. Naqvi, thank you very much for your time at Indus News. Taliban have repeatedly warned Turkey against keeping troops in Afghanistan to guard Kabul airport. Why do you think is Turkey willing to risk a conflict?
you see, they are doing it in concert with the United States, and I think this is just to maintain order when all the troops have left and Americans have quit Afghanistan completely. But yes, I think they should be mindful. Turkey should be mindful of the Taliban reservations about their presence. You see, a better idea would have been a UN force, a UN security force to take charge of the Kabul airport. That would not have raised any objections on the part of the Taliban. But somehow this has worked out between Americans and the Turks, and with the connivance or acceptance of the Kabul government of President Ashraf Ghani. So, you know, this is a situation where there could be resistance on the part of the Taliban. Of course, we must remember that the Taliban are not yet in Kabul as such, except for some sort of random groups that they might be supporting who are carrying out terrorist acts. So, if the Taliban are not in charge of Kabul, then they should not really be objecting to the arrangements regarding the Kabul airport. But they have given a public statement, and that is correct, as you have said, that they have objected to the Turkish involvement.
So, Mr. Naqvi, Taliban have taken a position of not capturing Kabul militarily, but with Taliban claims of over 85% of territorial control of the country. How powerful or relevant would the Ghani government be, even if they get to keep just Kabul, for instance?
Not really very relevant, because they would have lost most of the territory, and even if they have control of Kabul, that does not amount to very much in terms of running a government. So I think the Kabul government of Ashraf Ghani will have to take the stock of the situation. They are, of course, contesting the Taliban claim of 85% control of the country. Their defense minister and their national security advisor have both said that it is a much smaller control. But nevertheless, I think even conservative estimates say that the Taliban have control over 50% of the territory, which again is very substantial for a non-governmental militia or force to claim. So this situation is very worrying, and it could lead to a civil war scenario, which would be most destabilizing, not only for Afghanistan but for neighboring countries like Pakistan particularly.
Mr. Naqvi, former President Hamid Karzai has said today that there would be major advances made in the intra-Afghan talks in Doha very soon. So what incentive do the Taliban have to negotiate on the U.S. terms now that its influence in the country has diminished?
Yes, well, you see, the Taliban this time are also worried about international recognition. What happened last time, I think, is something they worry about, because last time they did not get international recognition, but for three countries, Pakistan, UAE and Saudi Arabia. The rest of the world completely boycotted the Taliban regime in Kabul. So the Taliban, I think, I don't know any, I don't have any knowledge of it, but I think the Taliban would want a recognition from other countries. And if that is the case, then they will negotiate with the U.S. and they will try to also play a more conciliatory role in the intra-Afghan dialogue. Because if they are coming to form, if they are coming to take over the government, or take over the country and form a government, then they would want to be recognized with most countries, if not all.
Mr. Ali Sarwar Naqvi, thank you very much for talking to Indus News. We really appreciate that. Now moving on, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi says Afghan leaders must show flexibility to achieve a negotiated settlement. He was speaking to his Afghan counterpart Hanif Atmar on the sidelines of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization's Council of Foreign Ministers meeting. Qureshi said the destinies of the two countries are intertwined and that any blame game would be detrimental to the peace process. He added that Pakistan and the international community don't want a return of a civil war in Afghanistan. Kashmiris around the world are observing the 90th Martyrs' Day. On this day in 1931, 22 Muslims were martyred during a peaceful protest against the Dogra rule in Srinagar.
Even 9 decades after the incident, the Kashmiris refused to give up their struggle for freedom. The courage and steadfastness of heroes like Burhan Wani is a beacon for freedom fighters. After stripping the region of its autonomy in 2019, the Indian government dropped the day from its list of public holidays. Since then, the Indian troops have martyred hundreds of Kashmiris and detained thousands of others. In a tweet, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan said Islamabad supports the right to self-determination of the Kashmiris. He said their struggle against illegal Indian occupation is steeped in a history of resistance and sacrifice. Meanwhile, President of Azad Kashmir, Masood Khan, termed the UN's role in the conflict disappointing. He deplored that nations that claim to be the custodian of international law are complicit in impunity for crimes in the valley.
And for more on this, we have Azad Jammu and Kashmir's President, Mr. Sardar Masood Khan, with us. Mr. President, thank you very much for your time at Indus News. Firstly, India has stepped up its military operations in occupied Kashmir as Prime Minister Narendra Modi prepares to take the next step in usurping Kashmiri's right to self-determination forever. How do you see the international community and the UN's inaction over this?
We'll have to separate the international community and the United Nations. The United Nations response as an organization has been disappointing. The United Nations Security Council has held 3 meetings, informal meetings on Jammu and Kashmir, but they have not produced any results, and they haven't continued their deliberations on Kashmir since India became a non-permanent member of the Council. The Secretary General has been making statements from time to time, but these are anodyne, very well balanced, very well crafted statements, but they have no substance at all. And the Secretary General doesn't indicate his intent or the intent of the United Nations Security Council to take any action on Kashmir. So that's why I say that their role has been very disappointing. When we talk about the international community, we'll have to include, of course, the powerful nations, but also international civil society. And in international civil society, I include all actors of civil society, like parliaments, media houses, think tanks, citizens in general, for instance, our diaspora community. And the response was good in the beginning, in the immediate aftermath of August 2019. But it petered out. So the international community, if you include the European Parliament in it, the British Parliament, the French Parliament, even the US Congress, they were very robust in their response. And the media houses, the main networks, the print media or the electronic media, they extensively reported India's crimes against humanity in the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, the siege that its troops had laid there, and they called out India and they sided with the people of Jammu and Kashmir. So we're thankful to them, and that support, that sense survives even up to this day.
Mr. President, has the BJP government succeeded in completely suppressing the freedom struggle of Kashmiris with its increased extrajudicial killings and crushing curfew since 5th of August 2019?
The BJP, the Bharatiya Janata Party, supported by Swayamsevak Sangh, they have not succeeded in Kashmir at all. As a matter of fact, their suppression is strengthening the resolve of the people of Jammu and Kashmir to work harder for the realization of their right to self-determination. This approach by the BJP, which is driven by hatred, by religious zealotry, by extremism, this can't succeed, because when they came marauding into the territory on August the 5th, 2019, they said that they are going to usher in development and they're going to open new vistas for the progress in the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. This is counterintuitive. As a matter of fact, how can you invest in development by killing people, by gunning down young men and women and dishonoring women, and stealing their land, and bringing millions of people, millions of Hindus from all over India, and illegally settling them in the besieged territory. So these are crimes against humanity. These are war crimes. India is accountable, and India is deluded into believing, by India I mean the Bharatiya Janata Party, zealots and extremists and Swayamsevak Sangh cadres, they're mistaken in believing that they can win hearts and minds of the people of Jammu and Kashmir by repressing them, by conducting ethnic cleansing, a systematic ethnic cleansing in the occupied territory. This doesn't work. This will not work. The anger of the people of Jammu and Kashmir has increased manifold. They have vowed that they would get their freedom and liberty under all circumstances. Right now, India accuses Kashmiris of terrorism. This is also a false accusation. No substance to it, because they have deployed 900,000 troops who are the real terrorists there, because they're the ones who are killing people. And they say that they are opposing or fighting some 200 militants. We don't call them militants, but these are young boys who fled their homes because of the tyranny of the occupation forces. So I think this is the biggest asymmetry of forces in the history of warfare. If India wants to project it as warfare, there's no warfare. They have waged this war against besieged population, civilian population, non-combatants.
Mr. President, Prime Minister Modi's recent attempt to appease Kashmiri politicians loyal to New Delhi for ages backfired. Both Mehbooba Mufti and Umar Abdullah refused to accept the unilateral annexation. Do you believe this can trigger a bigger resistance to the BJP government's designs?
Well, these leaders who met Narendra Modi, they're all fake currency. They've been rejected by the people of Jammu and Kashmir. You know, generation after generation, these leaders have been selling Kashmir to India, to Delhi, previously to the Congress party, now to the BJP and to the successive governments. They are traitors of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. Now they want to don a new mantle because they've been rejected by the BJP also. They want to assume this role of the saviors of the people of Jammu and Kashmir, but people of Jammu and Kashmir know them, that they have no credibility whatsoever. And but we should not underestimate the mischief that these leaders, Umar Abdullah or Mehbooba Mufti or Farooq Abdullah, that they can cause. Why? Because they are still lackeys and henchmen of the Indian establishment, the BJP RSS establishment, and they would play in their hands, because these fellows, when they were deprived of power and they were incarcerated, they are groping for a new role for them. And India also wants, I mean, Delhi also wants that these leaders who had some standing in the past as pro-Indian leaders, that they should endorse some of the actions that India has taken. For instance, demographic changes, for instance, delimitation of constituencies, for instance, India's operation against the Kashmiris, so that they can project this to the rest of the world. The Kashmiri leadership, quote-unquote Kashmiri leadership, has accepted India's decisions or India's actions. So I would say, coming from Mehbooba Mufti or any other leader, these pro-India leaders, these talks between India and Pakistan means nothing, because when Narendra Modi met these leaders from Jammu and Kashmir, I didn't see Sayyid Ali Gilani there, or Yasin Malik, or Shabir Shah, or Asiya Indrabi, who are the true representatives and true leaders of Jammu and Kashmir. So I would say that these fake leaders will not represent the aspirations of the people of Jammu and Kashmir, but they can still play a very negative role. And that's why the people of Jammu and Kashmir are vigilant, we are vigilant. Last point that I want to make in this context is that any talks from now on which take place without the participation of the people of Jammu and Kashmir would not produce any results whatsoever. Participation of the Jammu and Kashmir people, their true representatives, is a must, is imperative in a bilateral process, and I would not call it a bilateral process. It has to be a trilateral process, or any multilateral diplomatic process, or any third-party mediation. Kashmiris must be there around the table, at the table, when their fate is being discussed.
President of Azad Jammu and Kashmir, Sardar Masood Khan, thank you very much for talking to Indus News. We really appreciate that. Now let's talk to our correspondent Manahil Ahmed in Islamabad, who is covering an event regarding the Martyrs' Day. Manahil, give us the details of the event.
Pakistan political and Hurriyat leaders gathered in Islamabad to remember the martyrs in occupied Kashmir. Many political leaders, such as Foreign Office spokesperson Zahid Hafiz Chaudhry, the President of Azad Jammu and Kashmir, Sardar Masood, and along with many other senators, ministers, and Hurriyat leaders, are not only just remembering the martyrs of Kashmir, but also highlighting the atrocities that are committed by the Indian forces in the occupied valley. Foreign Office spokesperson Zahid Hafiz Chaudhry stressed that Pakistan will not start a peace dialogue with India unless it reinstates the semi-autonomous status in the occupied valley. It reinstates Article 35A and 370. Till then, he said, Pakistan will not start a peace dialogue with India. He also highlighted the extrajudicial killings, rape, torture, use of pellet guns, and the draconian laws that protect the Indian forces for committing all these crimes against innocent Kashmiris in occupied Kashmir. The political leaders, and along with the Hurriyat leaders, called on the global community and the United Nations to fulfill their promise and grant the people of Kashmir the right to self-determination.
Thank you for the updates, Manahil. Now moving on, in South Africa, the number of people killed in protests following the jailing of former President Jacob Zuma has risen to 45. Police officials say the government is working to contain the violence and lootings, but stopped short of declaring an emergency. Protesters have also been clashing with the police and destroying properties on a large scale. Nearly 800 people have been arrested so far, while officials have warned not to make a mockery of a democratic state. The military has also been deployed to assist police. Earlier, 10 people were killed during a stampede in a looting incident in Gauteng province. The violence triggered by Zuma's jailing evolved into an outpouring of anger over persistent poverty and inequality. In Ethiopia's Tigray region, rebels say they have recaptured a main town from the government forces and are moving forward to take back more territory. In a statement, a spokesman for the Tigray People's Liberation Front said their forces are closing in on the western town of Maitesebri. The rebels recaptured Mekelle city last month and now control most of the Tigray region. Meanwhile, the UN Rights Council has passed a resolution calling for swift and verifiable withdrawal of Eritrean troops from Tigray. The resolution noted that foreign troops are aggravating the conflict. It also expressed deep concern about rights abuses and hostilities in the region. More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. In Iraq, the death toll from a fire at a coronavirus hospital in the southern city of Nasiriyah has risen to 92. Health officials say more than 100 people were injured in the blaze, likely caused by an oxygen tank explosion. The blaze has been brought under control by civil defense teams. Prime Minister Mustafa al-Kadhimi has ordered the suspension and arrest of the city's health and civil defense managers. Meanwhile, relatives of the victims protesting outside the building have clashed with police and set 2 police vehicles on fire. The US says the ball is in Iran's court to return to the next round of Vienna talks to revive the 2015 nuclear deal. State Department spokesperson Ned Price says Washington is ready to return to discussions but will not impose a deadline. In a press briefing, he also warned that as time proceeds, Iran's nuclear advances will impact the US position. Earlier, Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Saeed Khatibzadeh said Vienna talks are approaching the final stage. He said draft texts of a possible agreement are prepared, but the US must lift sanctions on Iran first. Meanwhile, Iran has condemned the NATO chief's remarks in which he called on Tehran to comply with the UN agreement. Russia's President Vladimir Putin says Belarus remains Moscow's reliable partner in the economic sphere. He said this at a meeting with his Belarusian counterpart, Alexander Lukashenko, in St. Petersburg. Putin said the trade turnover between the two countries is growing. He added that Belarus serves all loans and reduces its external debt despite all sanctions. The Belarusian economy received a blow when the EU imposed curbs on some of its top exports after the Ryanair incident. This prompted Lukashenko to announce halting cooperation with the European bloc on stemming illegal migration. Turkey says its relations with Israel are of great importance for security and stability in the Middle East. This comes after President Tayyip Erdogan held a telephonic conversation with his Israeli counterpart Isaac Herzog. Erdogan said there is a high potential for bilateral cooperation in various fields, particularly in energy and tourism. He noted that trade between the two countries increased despite the coronavirus pandemic. Erdogan also reiterated the importance of a comprehensive two-state solution of the Palestinian-Israeli issue. Israel is forcing Palestinian families to destroy their own homes in Silwan neighborhood of occupied East Jerusalem. Israeli authorities asked 3 families to destruct homes or pay hefty fines for the municipality to do so. Earlier, Israeli soldiers demolished 5 structures in the Salfit city of the central West Bank, while Jewish settlers installed 7 mobile homes near an illegal colony built on stolen lands in Nablus. In Bethlehem city, 46 structures face an imminent threat of demolition after a court voided a previous ruling. Earlier, UN expert on human rights Michael Link condemned Israel over unlawful demolition of Palestinian homes. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has called on the international community to revamp vaccine production and ensure its equal distribution. He was virtually addressing a UN high-level political forum on sustainable development. The Prime Minister said the developing nations must be given vaccines at a fair price. Khan also highlighted Pakistan's efforts to fight COVID-19. He said through policies of smart lockdown, his country has been able to contain the virus. Khan added that now Islamabad is making all possible efforts to accelerate its vaccination campaigns. Meanwhile, the number of active cases in the country is nearly 40,000, while the positivity rate has declined to 3.63%. India has reported 2,020 deaths from COVID-19 and nearly 33,000 cases in the past 24 hours. South Korea has registered more than 1,000 new infections for the 7th straight day. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 4 million lives and infected over 187 million others. More in this report.
As the latest wave of the Delta variant of coronavirus rages on, so do the issues linked to the vaccines. U.S. regulators have added a new warning to the Johnson & Johnson's vaccine about the risk of a rare and potentially dangerous neurological reaction. The Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunization has signed deals with China's Sinovac and Sinopharm for supplying up to 550 million doses to COVAX. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization has advised against mixing and matching vaccines from different manufacturers.
So it's a little bit of a dangerous trend here where people are in a data-free, evidence-free zone as far as a mix and match. There is limited data on mix and match. It will be a chaotic situation in countries if citizens start, deciding when and who they should be taking a second or a third or a fourth dose.
Saudi Arabia has announced to send 1 million doses of vaccines to help Tunisia control the rapid spread of the outbreak. In France, President Emmanuel Macron has ordered all healthcare workers to get shots by September 15th. Macron has also announced the widening of a COVID pass system. From August, anyone wanting to go out for leisure will need to show either proof of vaccination or a negative test. Meanwhile, Australia has reported a slight decrease in new cases, but might still consider an extension of a lockdown in the country's largest city.
So we can never ever rest easy until we get that number of infectious in the community. So it was 21 last night. We need to get that as close to 0 as possible. And I again want to thank the vast majority of our citizens for doing the right thing. We are in this together, and in the next few days, we want to see those numbers go in the same direction. One day is not a trend. The numbers will keep bouncing around. We have to say that.
Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte has apologized for relaxing restrictions too soon as cases surge in the Netherlands. Meanwhile, in Asia, Bangladesh has set another grim record of the highest number of daily cases.
China has slammed what it called U.S. interference in its internal affairs under the pretext of Hong Kong. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian made the remarks during a press briefing in Beijing. Zhao said Hong Kong's relevant laws clearly protect the interests of foreign investors. He was responding to reports that Washington will warn U.S. firms of operating risks in Hong Kong. Beijing has dismissed accusations of genocide and forced labor in Xinjiang. Japan says growing military tensions around Taiwan threaten the peace and stability in East Asia. This is the first time Tokyo has taken up the issue of Taiwan Strait stability in its annual defense white paper. The defense review was approved by Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga's government. It highlighted the necessity to pay close attention to the situation with a higher sense of crisis than ever. The paper said stabilizing the situation surrounding Taiwan is important for regional and global security. It noted economic and technological rivalry between China and the US is a contributing factor to the crisis. China, backed by 50 countries, has condemned systematic racism against Africans and Asians. Addressing a UNHRC session in Geneva, China's permanent representative Chen Shu said the world needs to step up efforts to tackle racism. Chen said the global community needs to make efforts to fight systemic racism, racial discrimination, and hate crimes. He said that racist remarks by leaders, politicians, and the governments increased sharply during the COVID-19 pandemic. He added that such remarks incited violence, racial discrimination, xenophobia, Islamophobia, and hate crimes. Chen called on global human rights bodies to pay close attention to the issue and mull proper actions. In China, at least 8 people have been killed after a part of a hotel collapsed in Suzhou city of Jiangsu province. According to the state media, rescue workers are searching for 9 missing people in the ruins. The media quoted the local government as saying that as per the preliminary probe, an unauthorized renovation triggered the collapse. It said further investigations into the cause are underway. The 3-story hotel opened in 2018 and had 54 guest rooms. The US says it wants to work with Russia over climate change ahead of the UN conference in Glasgow later this year. The remarks come as US climate change envoy John Kerry met Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in Moscow. Kerry said he wants to set out some proposals to Moscow. He noted the US is the world's 2nd biggest greenhouse gas emitter and Russia the 4th. The US envoy said the two nations therefore have a responsibility to act. For his part, Lavrov said Moscow is also hoping for close cooperation with Washington on climate issues. The Russian foreign minister said he views Kerry's visit as a positive signal for bilateral relations. In India, the death toll from monsoon-related incidents across the country has risen to 81. At least 2 people have died in landslides and flash floods caused by heavy rains in the northern part of the country. 10 people are still missing in Himachal Pradesh after the flood destroyed homes, damaged roads, and swept away cars. With further rains expected, Kangra district authorities are on high alert. Earlier, 76 people were killed by lightning strikes in Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, and Uttar Pradesh states. Western parts of the U.S. continue to endure scorching heat as temperatures threaten to shatter records. The heat wave triggered by a lingering high-pressure system is already the 3rd for the region this year. The National Weather Service said the hot spell with moderate temperatures expected till end of the week. However, in an advisory, it said heat warnings will remain in effect from California to Utah. In California, the Beckworth complex fire grew to 89,600 acres with about 23% containment. As Eid al-Adha is fast approaching, a rooftop cattle farm in Karachi is grabbing a lot of attention. Let's find out why.
Every year, polished cattle are lowered by crane from Syed Ijaz Ahmed's rooftop farm down into a congested street of the Nazimabad neighborhood ahead of the sacrificial festival. This year, the festival takes place for 3 days next week from 21st of July. An exciting crowd jostles to see a white ox weighing more than 500 kilograms hanging by straps as it is carefully lowered from the top of the 4-story building.
I buy the cattle when they are small. I bring them onto the rooftop through the staircase and rear them. Then after a year, when they are fully grown, we cannot get them down to the ground using the staircase. So that's why I have to hire a crane to do it.
People usually buy sacrificial animals for slaughter a few days before Eid, but Ahmed decided to build a barn on his rooftop and raise his own. It has proved to be a much more economical choice for the small business owner, even though he has to hire a crane. He's been doing this for the past 18 years. Residents, especially children, gather to witness this annual spectacle of cattle being lifted off the rooftop.
I bring my children here to watch this every year. It is a holiday today. When I told them that Chand oxen will be lowered to the ground today, she asked, "The same oxen we saw last year?" I said yes. So instead of spending this holiday anywhere else, we came here to enjoy the sight.
This year, Ahmed selected 5 oxen and 1 cow for the festival, which is one of the most important events in the Islamic calendar. The meat will be shared among family and friends and also donated to the poor.
It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. And other business updates, China's exports rose at a much faster pace than expected in June. Customs data shows exports in dollar terms grew over 32% from a year earlier. They exceeded the forecast of 23% and were up from 27.9% growth in May. Meanwhile, imports also spiked over 36% year-on-year in June, beating a 30% forecast. However, they slowed from a 51% gain in May, which was the highest growth rate in a decade. The trade surge comes as easing lockdown measures and vaccination drives trigger a solid global demand. U.S. plane maker Boeing says it will cut its 787 production after discovering a new structural flaw in some planes. In a statement, the Chicago-based company said it will deliver less than half of the 787s remaining in its inventory this year. Following the announcement, the company's shares dropped by 3%. The Federal Aviation Administration said the new flaws in some of the undelivered planes pose no immediate threat to flight safety. The Wall Street stocks have climbed over a rise in growth-linked stocks and the start of the earnings season on a strong note. A solid rise in consumer prices in June also bolstered the investor sentiment. The Nasdaq Composite traded over 0.25% higher, while the S&P 500 was also up marginally. But the Dow Jones Industrial Average traded at a fraction lower. Meanwhile, the oil prices have surged over expectations of further decline in the U.S. crude oil inventories. And now for weather updates, we have Munib Hamid with us.
Thank you. Now with the weather updates, let's dive first into Abu Dhabi, where it is a whooping 46 degrees Celsius, though it will feel much hotter because of the sunny weather. While in Amsterdam, the temperature is decent with 22 degrees Celsius with some cloudy weather. While in Ankara, the weather is a bit on the hotter side with some sunny skies and temperatures rising to around 33 degrees Celsius. Now going down under to Auckland, the weather is absolutely divine as the winter clouds are keeping the sun at bay with temperatures expected to reach 12 degrees Celsius. Though, if you are heading to Bangkok, keep that umbrella with you because intense thunderstorms are in the forecast and the temperature could rise to 32 degrees Celsius. While in Beijing, we'll only be experiencing cloudy weather at 30 degrees Celsius. Now traveling to Beirut, keep some sunblock on hand because the sun will be beaming and gleaming with temperatures rising up to 31 degrees Celsius. Meanwhile, in Berlin, the temperatures will be around 29 degrees Celsius with some cloudy weather. While those who are residing in Cairo, you will experience some severe sun with temperatures rising to 37 degrees Celsius. But it will feel like a lot more. So make sure you are out in the sun. If we head down under again to Canberra, on the winter weather will be cloudy and chilly with temperatures at 14 degrees Celsius. Though, if you're heading into the city of Islamabad, keep a raincoat on you because thunderstorms are predicted with temperatures at around 29 degrees Celsius. And lastly, in Jakarta, there will be rain, but hopefully no storms with temperatures rising to 32 degrees Celsius. That's all we have for now. Back to you.
Munib, thank you for the weather updates. And that is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.